Hi Tina, how are you? How was your
Good.
Thanksgiving?
I was good. Very, very relaxed with some family friends.
Nice, nice.
Yes, I have invited Cindy to join us. So hopefully the invitation goes through.
Yes, we're super excited to have Cindy because as a registered dietitian, super excited to have Cindy because she's also a registered dietitian. Um, and we're going to be talking about really important topics
Oh.
today.
Cindy. So
Hey.
Naked,
Hello,
thank you for
Cindy.
joining us.
No problem. I'm just going to turn on my ring light here, actually. That's probably a little bit better. So, Tina
Yeah.
and Jenna.
Yes, Tina and Jenna.
Nice
Okay,
to meet
awesome. Right
you.
on. Likewise. Yeah.
Thank you for
How are
joining.
you guys today?
Good.
Good, good.
It's very dry, but
Dry. Where
yeah.
are you in the world?
I am in LA area. That's the humidity is
Right
very
on.
low, but at least there's
Oh,
no more like the forest fire winds have kind of
oh,
erased.
yeah. Oh,
Yeah,
my
it's just
gosh.
very, very low humidity. Um,
Sorry
That
that
you
my
want to introduce yourself?
forehead is in.
oh yeah, I am the product manager for Million Market. I do a lot of the report generation and product recommendations as well as generating our approved product lists.
Right on.
Yeah.
And
So
I'm Jenna. I'm the founder and CEO of Familiar Marker, so also a registered dietitian. So I'm always super excited to have
bring the
registered
company.
dietitian on. Yes. So and then we're like super excited to talk about this topic too, because I haven't we haven't started talking about it, but I know endometriosis is actually quite common. It's actually impacting, 11% of women aged between 30 and 40s in the US, and that's like 6.5 million women. And then it's often caused like complicates fertility and then cause really severe pain and irregular menstrual cycle. So thank you, Cindy, for coming and joining and then educating our audience about it.
Yeah, you're so welcome. Yeah, speaking of endometriosis, I'm not sure if you mentioned this in the intro, and I happen to have it myself. And today is one of the not so great days. So for anybody
I'm sorry
who
to
is
hear that.
watching our live today, it's okay. I'm right. I'm doing okay. But anybody who's watching our live who might be feeling the same, my heart goes out to you. And yeah, glad to be here nonetheless.
Thank you for still making it. I know this must be difficult.
Yeah. So
All
like,
good.
could you tell us a little bit about your educational background and what led you to choose a career to, manage diet to deal with symptoms of endometriosis?
Sure. So my educational background is not linear, like a lot of young people have these days, right? Where you think you're going to go into a space and then you end up making a whole bunch of changes. So I did do a first degree. I did a Bachelor of Arts at a university here in the Toronto area, and then I went on to do my Bachelor of Science, which was my dietetics undergrad degree, and then I also have a Master's of Applied Human Nutrition. So that's my educational background. And in terms of what I guess inspired me to work in the endo space as a dietitian. Uh, when I decided on dietetics as a profession, I just knew I would start a private practice in this space because, much like so many other people with endometriosis, I tried so many different things, birth control and medication. I even had surgery. And and I want to preface before I kind of finish my thought here that, treatment options are going to be different for everybody, and what works for one person may not work for another. But uh, managing my endometriosis with diet and lifestyle has by far been the most impactful. And when you think about all the options that are available to us, they're pretty invasive and they do come with a lot of kind of gnarly side effects, right? So if you can manage something, even though you have to be very diligent about it with diet and lifestyle and with your food choices, in my opinion, that's a huge win, right? So that's my answer to that question. And, diet and lifestyle, if this may not be a popular opinion, but eating well and moving your body, these are great things to do no matter kind of what state of health you're in, right? So for me, even though I absolutely hate the pain and, you know, inconvenience of having endometriosis, it is a little bit, I would say for myself personally, I can't speak for everybody, it is a bit of a blessing in disguise because it does force me to eat better and be conscious about my food choices and moving my body and, you know, watching my alcohol intake and that sort of thing. So, but I certainly have my days where I'm like, I hate this, and I wish I could just like enjoy some wine with my husband. So yeah.
We are
We
absolutely
I was just gonna say the exact same.
yeah.
Totally believing diet and lifestyle, and then also like diet and lifestyle are a huge component for environmental exposures. And then from what we've seen, people with better lifestyle and diet, they tend to also have lower environmental exposures. And then we're talking about, you know, harmful toxin exposures. So we're totally aligned.
Yeah, that's great to hear.
It's not an unpopular opinion among us, at least.
Yeah.
So I guess Jenna briefly touched upon this earlier about the symptoms, but can you tell us and our viewers a little bit more about like the telltale conditions or like signs of this condition?
Sure. Yeah. So again, I want to preface by saying that endometriosis is different on everybody, right? So there certainly are more characteristic symptoms. So extremely painful, debilitating periods, you know, to the point where it's interfering with activities of daily living, pain with sex. They can move into like the GI space, so constipation, loose stools, the severe, painful, and persistent bloating. I'm getting a bit of feedback. Are you guys getting that as well?
A little bit on my side.
Okay, maybe I'll talk a little bit quieter. Do you think that will make a difference or?
It sounds okay on my end, but
Okay.
yeah.
All right. Okay, hopefully it's okay. Maybe if the people who are watching can give us like a thumbs up or something.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, so GI symptoms. So in fact, I just put up a post today on probiotics, and I've done a couple of posts about this in the past around how there's actually scientific literature around how the gut microbiomes of people with endometriosis favor lesser numbers of bacterial strains that are helpful, right? That reduce inflammation, mitigate inflammation, help with digestion, synthesis of nutrients,
Yeah.
you know, a long list of other great stuff, and a higher number of inflammatory pathogens and species that we don't want to have a lot of in the gut. So inevitably, you know, that's going to come with some kind of GI symptoms.
Right. Yeah.
And, you know, pain, back pain, a pain that moves down the leg. And then all the sort of secondary things to living with chronic illness, right? So trouble sleeping. It also extends into, you know, the mental health space. So depression, anxiety, trouble with relationships, trouble with work and school life. So I'm always very conscious to mention those things because, you know, endo is an inflammatory condition. It's this endometrial like tissue that's present. Like you can see it when you do surgery, like or when you have surgery or like highly trained sonographers can also see it through ultrasound, but it's so much more than that, right? So lots of pain. It can also cause infertility, of course. So 50% of all infertility cases have some kind of connection with endometriosis, and 30% of people who have endometriosis will have trouble conceiving. You know, there's a really long list of symptoms. I'm really just scratching the surface here, but yeah, that's kind of what the condition looks like. So painful periods. I was actually just reading some research in preparation for some more content. There is this statistic where 70 to 90% of women who experience like cyclical pain with periods likely have endometriosis. So although the statistic is 1 in 10 right now, or maybe even 1 in 9, I would argue it's probably a lot more than that. Also, sorry, they're coming to mind, so I'm just going to speed them out. But you know, changes with your cycles, heavy bleeding, clotty bleeding. These are also symptoms as well.
So these are some signs that people should look out for if they want to get tested to see if they
exactly
have the condition. Okay, that's good to know because you know, some people might not be able to attribute these symptoms that they're struggling with the actual condition. And
Yeah.
but who is most at risk of developing endometriosis? Maybe that can help people understand whether or not these
Yeah.
symptoms
So
are treated.
this is a really good question. And there's a lot of like bizarre science about risk factors for endo. Like you'll find this in scientific literature and like academic journals where like pain during men or not pain, sorry, sex during menses or early menstruation are risk factors. But the things that I pay most close attention to, because I think those things are just very I feel like they might instill a little bit more fear in people than is necessary. And
Right.
I don't know. I don't know that anyway, I don't particularly weigh those heavily in terms of risk factors, although they are in academic journals. But the
Yeah.
things that I pay attention to are, definitely genetics. So if you are somebody who has an immediate relative who has endometriosis, you're about 6 times as likely to have it as well. So like a mother or a sister, then your chances are a lot higher. So it's the case for me. My mom also has endometriosis, and there are some dietary risk factors. So if the diet is high in alcohol or processed, white refined processed foods higher in red meat or processed meat, these we know these are like established connections that your risk for endometriosis increases as well.
Okay.
Um,
Are there any specific demographic groups outside of those who may receive it genetically who should be careful about it?
you know, anybody can have endometriosis, no matter what your race or your
Age?
yeah. I mean, so this is actually a really important point that you bring up. So, because I know a lot of people, well, hopefully this is changing a little bit more in the medical space, but because period pain is brushed off, right? It's brushed off so quickly. And I think it continues to be so still even today, even though like we're so much more advanced in terms of our, the science and our understanding of the disease. Where was I going with this? There's still, I think a lot of healthcare providers are still suggesting that it's just period pain or it's just in your head or whatnot. And again, I was reading a little bit of literature recently around specifically identifying endo in young people, right? Teenagers, because the disease does progress, right? And so particularly in young people, because we know that endo can threaten fertility, we actually want to be paying more attention. And I had a really great live with a UK-based surgeon, endometriosis specialist, who, was making that comment that basically or along like related to this, saying that they're trying to make it the norm to offer fertility preservation to people with endometriosis because we know that it can threaten fertility quite significantly. So you can be, you can be postmenopausal and still have endometriosis and still struggle with pain and the symptoms associated with endometriosis. You also could have not even started menstruating yet and already have symptoms of endometriosis. So I think the demographic is quite broad. The age range is quite broad. And I think it's really important to recognize that because this is a very large group of people who are suffering almost every day for some people, right?
Yeah, definitely. That's good to at least
And
be aware that anyone is at risk.
Yeah, and we're probably underdiagnosing people considering these symptoms are often missed. So this also makes education so important that people are aware of, potential symptoms so then they can actually get checked and then start taking precautions, paying attention on their diet and lifestyle to manage the condition, to control it and not letting it getting worse.
Right.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I totally agree with that for sure.
Yeah, so we talked a little bit about, genetic plays a factor in developing endometriosis. And then, we also learned at Melanie Marker, we also learned that genetics, are responsible for about 30% of chronic illnesses. And then it's like the environmental triggers could influence the rest of the, 70% of chronic disease risk. And then you noted also on your website that, there are 4 common hallmarks of endometriosis and which like tie into environmental exposures. Do you mind discussing, each of them?
Yeah, sure. So You know,
Loaded question.
no, it's great, but I mean, as a dietitian yourself, you're very aware that like obviously science evolves, and we're required also to keep on top of our education and training. So the four that I actually have posted on my website have changed a little bit. So the ones that I refer to now are immune system dysfunction, hormonal imbalances. So that kind of ties in the estrogen dominance and the progesterone resistance that are broken down into separate hallmarks on my website. Inflammation, of course, and then angiogenesis, which is that formation of new blood vessels to endometrial-like tissue, because obviously it needs a blood supply in order to thrive and grow and do all the crazy things that it does. So with immune system dysfunction, basically, it's a very complicated topic. So in short, it's that, we have a number of different cells of the immune system, and they're meant to function optimally. And when the immune system is functioning well, the objective is that it identifies, like in the case of endometriosis, this tissue that's not meant to be there. The immune system comes in, it's meant to clear it away. But what the scientific literature is showing us is in people with endometriosis, a lot of these cells of the immune system just aren't functioning the way that they should. So like, let's say hypothetically, I mean, this isn't actually how it works, but let's say like only 50% of your immune system is responding to this endometrial-like tissue. Well, that means that there's an opportunity 50% of the time for this endometrial-like tissue to continue to proliferate, because it's basically flying under the radar of the person's immune system. So then it can establish, proliferate, right? So that's sort of the immune system dysfunction piece. And then you have the hormonal imbalances. So the endometrial-like tissue itself can be a source of estrogen. And we know that endometriosis is also a estrogen dependent condition. So it does depend on estrogen to kind of grow, proliferate. So it's kind of freaky that the tissue itself can actually be a source of estrogen, and basically kind of almost like self-sustain. So that's one thing, but it goes into more than that. It's also the whole point about progesterone resistance. So a lot of people with endo will produce sufficient amounts of progesterone, but the receptors just won't bind this progesterone. And so that's also a form of estrogen dominance, right? Like if your progesterone levels are very low and you have normal estrogen or elevated estrogen, these are both scenarios of estrogen dominance. So, and then depending on how well you're clearing estrogen through your liver, that can also be a source of inflammation for you with the condition, right? So if you're not clearing estrogen through properly, if you're not able to get it out in your stools, a lot of people with endo are constipated or experience constipation, then it will basically contribute to pain and inflammation that's associated with the disease. And then you've got inflammation, of course. So there's a number of different sources of inflammation with endo. The tissue itself is a source of inflammation, because every time, and I think I missed your intro, so I don't know if you explained this, but it's tissue that's similar, not precisely the same, but similar to that which lines the uterus. So, when you menstruate, this tissue also bleeds. And so the difference is that it's not in the uterus, it's outside elsewhere in the body. And so it also bleeds, but it doesn't have anywhere to go. So it forms the scar tissue around various organs, and can cause blockages and impact how organs function and cause infertility and that sort of thing. So every time that happens, like menstruation itself is actually an inflammatory event, right? You have these prostaglandins that stimulate the shedding of the uterine lining. So it's actually quite an inflammatory event. But in somebody with endo who has all this, other tissue, endometrial-like tissue in the abdomen, that's a source of inflammation. I already mentioned the estrogen as well. It could be a source of inflammation. I also mentioned previously that the gut health, like if you are somebody who has a lot of opportunistic bacterial strains, which can act as a source of inflammation. So lots and lots of inflammation surrounding endometriosis. There's lots of indirect contributors as well, right? Like, for example, we know that exercise is anti-inflammatory, but when you're in chronic pain, you can't always move your body. And so you're not always in a position to be able to help yourself to reduce that inflammation, right? Or you don't always have the best appetite, so you're not always reaching for the best foods that are going to help reduce inflammation. So there's lots of like indirect contributors as well to inflammation. And then angiogenesis, I mentioned already, is that formation of new blood vessels to endometrial-like tissue. And it needs an established blood supply, right, to kind of grow and proliferate. Not all endometrial-like tissue is like red with a strong blood. I think we lost. Oh no,
Here,
we're back.
she's back.
Okay.
Okay, good.
So what was I saying? Yeah, so the tissue can be like red with blood. It can also become white or dark depending on kind of the stage. So those are sort of the four hallmarks. I don't know if you wanted me to elaborate any more about that.
No, these are like such great information. It's this condition is just so complicated. It connected to so many systems. And, for us, we talk about hormone balance or imbalance. And then it makes it kind of scary. We also educate people on, hormone kind of, system kind of work as an orchestra. It's like also lock and key. They're like act a tiny amount and very, very precise. So this makes hormone balance like really important. And then one of the chemicals that we test for BPA actually mimics estrogen. So if people have like, higher BPA levels, then they could potentially lead to estrogen dominance, which is like kind of like scary. So like, besides, higher exposure to BPA or other things, what are some common causes of estrogen dominance?
Yeah, so the tissue itself is a source of inflammation. And then we also want to look at how it's being cleared. So this is a major contributor as well to estrogen dominance. So, I mean, you guys are probably pretty like informed with this stuff working in the space that you're in, but maybe for those who are watching, the estrogen goes through basically three phases. I'll just mention this really quickly for anybody who's interested, who's watching, but it basically goes through three different phases, right? So after, we have these three types of estrogen: estrone, estradiol, estriol. It's converted into metabolite, so basically breakdown products. And this happens in the liver, and then it's methylated. So a methyl group donor donates a methyl group. I know this is like super sciencey, but donates a methyl group, and that makes the estrogen water soluble. So now it can be excreted through the stools, right? Because we always want to break down and then excrete anything that the body's done using. And so, if you and the analogy that a lot of people who work in this space like to use is that of like a bathtub. So you got a bathtub filling with water, and then obviously, like everybody's bathtub, you have a drain in which it drains into, right? And that goes into sort of your general sewage system. So if you have a blockage at any point from the water flowing into your bathtub, and the bathtub water flowing into the drain, and then the drain flowing into the general sewage system, then obviously that's going to back up the amount of water in the bathtub, right? So that can also be a source of inflammation if you're not methylating properly, which I see all the time in people with endo, or if you're chronically constipated, right? Because you actually can't get the estrogen out. And then we've got the estrobolome, which brings me to another contributor of estrogen dominance. So the estrobolome refers to the connection between the gut microbiome and our hormones. So there's something in the gut called beta glucuronidase. And so when we have elevated amounts of beta glucuronidase, what it will do, it will package estrogen that's destined for excretion through your stools, and then circle it back into your body. And so that will obviously contribute to estrogen dominance as well. You want to look at cortisol, stress levels. These things are also going to contribute to estrogen dominance. And I already kind of mentioned this before, but even if your progesterone estrogen ratios are off, like even if your progesterone is normal, but your estrogen is elevated, then that's estrogen dominance. Or if your progesterone is too low and your estrogen is normal, that's still going to be estrogen dominance. And then, of course, you always want to look at environmental exposures. So zona estrogens, which I think Jenna, right? Yeah, Jenna was referring to. So yeah, like you said, I mean, they bind to the same receptors and they can mimic estrogen. So that's something that I definitely look at as well for like causes of estrogen dominance.
Yeah, makes sense. So like many people are like unaware how our diet could cause chronic inflammation. Why does diet play such a large role?
Oh my gosh, how much time do we have? um, So I'm going to kind of refer back to the question around the hallmarks. So, the first one being that immune system dysfunction. So already if the immune system, around about 70 to 80% of the immune system is located in the gut. So already if you have some kind of imbalance in the gut, this is already kind of throwing the balance off in your body. There's going to be inflammation coming from your gut. So if you can support your gut microbiome to produce more anti-inflammatory chemicals to better absorb and synthesize nutrients, then that is going to reduce inflammation quite significantly. So here we're looking at things like dietary resistant starches, dietary probiotics, all of your phytonutrients. So I'm always talking about colors in the diet, right? These things play a significant role in the gut microbiome. Vitamin D and omega-3s, we know that these also block LPSs, lipopolysaccharides, which we know there's a massive connection there with endometriosis. These things, lipopolysaccharides, have actually been established in scientific literature for causing proliferation of endometriosis. So when we know, I don't want to give you guys the wrong information. I think it's omega-3s specifically that actually block the binding of lipopolysaccharides, which can then produce inflammation. And I'm going like way too sciencey here. I'm so sorry. I get really like hyped up about this stuff, but
I love it.
so those things from the gut perspective, right? And then when it comes to hormones, like B vitamins in our diet, cruciferous vegetables we know contain indole-3 carbanols, which are helpful for excreting excess estrogen and supporting proper methylation, so estrogen can get through the liver, which naturally is also going to reduce inflammation if you don't have a buildup of inflammatory estrogens. All of the colors, so we know all of our phytonutrient colors, they all offer different anti-inflammatory properties, right? So there's that. Omega-3s, we know that the North American diet is like something crazy. Like the ratio of omega-6s to 3s is like 40-1. It's like insane. I don't know, Jenna, maybe you know better what the statistic is, but like a while back when I was reading about this, it was like 40-1. It was crazy.
Yeah, it was great.
And we want that ratio to be a little bit more like 4-1, right? So it's like quite a like significant amount more than what we want to see it out, right? So even though like if you're getting the bulk of your omega-6s from like healthy sources like nuts and seeds, for example, or some oils, then that's not the like worst case. But most people, unfortunately, because just as a society, like we're so much busier and unfortunately, because vegetable oils are subsidized and they're so inexpensive and so accessible, we're getting a lot of these through our diet this way. And so, and then unfortunately, omega-3s in the diet are significantly less available, and people tend to dislike the sources of omega-3s, like our oily fish, a lot more than those packaged and processed foods that we're getting in like fast food establishments or boxed, goods that we buy in the grocery store. So that's also going to be a source of inflammation, right? So omega-6s are like, they're not bad fats. Like we want to have them in the diet. We need inflammatory fats, right? Because if you cut yourself or get a fever, like it's the body's, like it's a pro-inflammatory response that your body, creates in order to help you heal. But the problem is we also need anti-inflammatory fats, especially in the case of endometriosis. And so you just kind of make that, we definitely can make the fighting inflammation part of endometriosis a lot more uphill, like a more of an uphill battle, when we're not being conscious of that omega-6 to 3 ratio that we're getting in the diet. I mean, there's a ton more I can say on this topic, but I feel like I'm just ranting.
No, I mean, you touched on a few of these before earlier, but are there specific foods that people should avoid eating when they're trying to prevent endometriosis or trying to treat it?
So the one food I would say, definitively without any kind of guilt on my part to avoid would be trans fats. Trans fats aren't really good for anything. And they're just not good for gut health. They're not good for hormone balance. They're delicious, don't get me wrong. So if you want to have them once in a while to enjoy, something delicious and greasy, that's fine. But generally speaking, we do want to avoid them. I am a non-restrictive endometriosis dietitian, so although I know there's a lot of people who talk about removing certain foods from the diet, I don't personally believe that, nor is it evidence-based. The one thing we do have a little bit of research for is gluten. So for some people with endo, gluten removal does seem to improve symptoms. My thought is always, well, is it the fact that you've cut out a lot of white refined sources of gluten from your diet? Because personally, when I think about what I eat that contains gluten, it's usually like cookies or croissants or something like that, right? As opposed to like spelt or, like barley, right? Like, and those are whole food sources of gluten, right? So if you're cutting out those and you're feeling better, then yeah, you very much probably do have a gluten sensitivity, and you're probably better off removing them all from the diet, even if they're whole food sources. But my assumption would be that people started experiencing improvements in symptoms because they cut out a lot of the white refined sources, which are going to, of course, also be higher in omega-6s, so those inflammatory fats, and are probably more on the white refined, they're more probably white refined sources, right, on that scale. There's a couple of things that are hit or miss. Like some people will respond to them, like respond to removal but I don't personally encourage those unless somebody is really keen on removing them.
Which ones are maybe you're referring to, like in terms of you wouldn't necessarily be keen on?
Yeah, I think a lot of, oh, sorry, I didn't take you off. I think a lot of people remove dairy because dairy, I mean, naturally coming from animal, they are going to be higher in saturated fats. And then we know that saturated fats can be inflammatory as well. I can talk about this from many different angles. I mean, if you're somebody with endo, but you're also trying to conceive, well, we know that dairy products are actually really protective for fertility. We also know that higher amounts of dairy, there's actually a number of scientific studies that show this, that actually higher amounts of dairy intake are associated with a reduced risk of endometriosis. So here we're just talking about risk factors. It's actually associated with a reduced risk of endometriosis, which is interesting. What else do I want to say about this? But dairy is also a highly, nutrient dense food, right? It's a really solid source of protein, dietary probiotics, vitamin D. Most dairy sources contain dietary vitamin D. And these are specific nutrients that I see a lot of people with endo actually under consuming. So, these are nutrients that are very important. Like I already alluded to, like the vitamin D and the dietary probiotics. Protein, I don't think maybe like 10% of my clients or people that I interact with consume enough protein, right? So this is another thing, right? So these are very nutrient dense food sources. I want people to keep that in mind. Like these are very nutrient dense food sources. And when you're fighting inflammation, your body needs nutrition, and it needs bioavailable nutrition. And unfortunately, the animal sources are just, it's well established that these are more bioavailable, even though I love plant-based sources and I personally consume a lot of plant-based foods. I just think that, a nice mix is more appropriate. But of course, this has to be individualized. Not everybody is going to be able to consume whatever they want. And like another thing too, I think a lot of people, refer to dietary restriction as a way of managing endo because, and I've definitely been here. So if there's somebody who's watching this, I'm like, oh yeah, I feel you, Cindy. Like it seems like a very easy step to take relative to living with pain for the rest of your life, right? It seems like, and some people get really desperate, and I've been there too, right? Like you just want some relief, and restricting your diet and removing some food seems like a really happy or easy compromise, right? If it's like going into medically induced menopause or living with pain for the rest of your life, right? So I get that. The one thing, I guess the one kind of like last take home point I want to make here is we have to adjust those hallmarks first. So no matter no matter what degree of restriction you undertake, if your gut health is a mess or you're not properly excreting excess hormone, you may only make that worse. And if your gut is inflamed, probably, the most important thing when it comes to an inflamed gut is nutrient dense foods, right? To support a reduction in that inflammation in your gut. And anyway, I'm just like, I think I'm going off on a tangent now, but we have to adjust those hallmarks, right? Because dietary restrictions it's only going to touch the surface of the problem if those like deeper rooted contributors are not addressed first. Sorry about zapping on, ladies. I'm just very talkative.
I think we all agree this is like such good information.
Yeah.
And then it seems that because it's so individualized, it's really important for people to see a specialist with individual, dietary plans and then the whole
Totally.
health plan. Now this brings me
Totally.
to the topic, what are some of the service that you provide to your clients?
Yeah, so thanks for the opportunity to chat about that. I have basically two main offers right now. I mean, my practice is still in its early years. I think I'm in year 2 of my practice. So I do one-on-one coaching. So it's one-on-one, it's 8 sessions. I won't go into all the details about that, but there's basically the one-on-one coaching option. And then I recently launched my EndoBabe Empowered online program for the first time in October. So lots of babes in that program are killing it. They're just doing such a great job. And it's basically, developed like an online program that talks about everything that I would address in my one-on-one coaching, just minus like the one-on-one kind of accountability aspect. So it's price point wise, it's a lot more affordable. Yet you get the same amount of information, all the same resources that I use with my one-on-one clients. And you still do get access to me. I have a Facebook community where I will answer questions directly, more than happy to advise on, anything that you're struggling with and just helping the ladies get through the program without feeling overwhelmed or confused. And it's just a really affordable way to get support. And then I'm looking in January to launch some group programming as well, so I can help more people, I guess, with just me, because I'm just one person and so much need in this space. It's heartbreaking. So yes.
This is awesome. Looks like we have some questions in the chat, people sending some questions. Maybe we can look at those through before we end.
Yeah. The most recent one is there a good multivitamin and or probiotic that you would recommend?
So my two favorite prenatals or multis. So by the way, even if you're not looking to conceive or if you're menopausal or postmenopausal, I still recommend prenatals just because they're a lot more complete. So a lot of the nutrition somebody with like looking to conceive needs, in my opinion, I think a lot of people with endo need as well. So they're a lot more complete. And I also like the forms in which the vitamins are included, because you can get like synthetic forms versus like methylated or active forms of some vitamins. So my two favorites are Full Circle Prenatal. They're awesome. And then my second favorite would be the Optimal Prenatal by Seeking Health. I really like those. I don't tend to recommend prenatals or multis that contain iron. This is a topic that I think we don't have enough time to talk about today, but iron is something in endometriosis that's like Goldilocks and the Three Bears. If you have too little or too much, it's going to be inflammatory for you. So you really want to make sure you're getting the right amount. And I find the safest way to do that is just making sure you're supporting the systems that help absorb iron. So like stomach acid, for example, making sure there's nothing overgrown in the small bowel or large bowel, and just getting it through dietary sources, because we are more than capable of absorbing iron if all those systems through diet, assuming those systems are working optimally. Probiotic wise, this question's a little bit hard for me to answer because I just did a post on probiotics today, so check that one out if you haven't seen it already. The probiotics, you don't just take probiotics for the sake of taking probiotics, right? Like there are evidence-based strains that you take for specific reasons, right? So there are probiotic strains for constipation, there are probiotic strains for mood, for mastitis, for inflammatory bowel disease, for inflammation. So it really depends on kind of what you're looking to support. So whoever asked that question, if you wanted a little bit more of like, I guess, a specific answer, just send me a message and I'd be happy to answer that. It's just, it's hard to answer because, and if you're somebody who has like, great digestion, you're not, uncomfortably bloated all the time, you're having regular stools, digestion seems like relatively healthy, like no complaints in that department, you may not even need a probiotic, right? Dietitians love first food approach. So if you can get it through dietary sources, do that, right? Don't save your money and spend it on something else. But if you do have a specific concern, then just send me a DM and I'll see if I can help.
Great. I don't know how much time. We have a few more questions. Jenna, how much time do you think?
Depending on Cindy, if Cindy have time, maybe we can answer some
I can
questions.
be with you guys. I can be with you guys till maybe about 5 to 6, and then I have to hop on with a client.
So
So
we have one question about diagnosis. So how
Okay.
does the process go for doctors diagnosing you with endometriosis, even if you yourself can see that the symptoms point to endometriosis and you have genetics pointed to endometriosis, but the doctors say that it's something else? How would you try to get a diagnosis? I think this person is trying to ask.
Okay, so it almost sounds like the question is asking about like how do you deal with like a doctor who isn't patient-centered or who maybe isn't listening to you.
Right.
I mean, get a new doctor. Like, I don't know. I don't know how else to answer that question. Here, so I'm in Canada. I'm just outside of the GTA. So here, for anybody who is Canadian, the process is basically my recommendation for the process would be, hop on a search engine, Google like endometriosis specialists in your area and see if you can find any information about surgeons that are taking you patients, and then just request a referral, because a regular GP, I'm assuming you don't have like a specialized OBGYN or some other kind of doctor, like it's probably like a family practice doctor. They won't be able to diagnose you anyway. You have to get a referral to a specialist. So that would be my advice. Find somebody or hop on, see if you can find somebody who's taking new patients, who's an endometriosis specialist, and then request a referral from your family doctor. I want to remind people something. Doctors, much like other regulated healthcare professionals, belong to a college. So this college is in place to protect you. So if you feel like you're being disrespected or you're not being listened to, and I want to give people with endo like the courage to stand up for yourself, because for so long we are belittled, our symptoms are brushed off. No, you are a kick-ass, strong person. You've been dealing with this disease for X number of years. You have the strength to be able to confront your doctor about the fact that they're providing shitty care. And then worst case scenario, you can always go to the college and complain, right? That's worst case scenario. But the college is in place. College is in place for dietitians, nurses, all these other regulated healthcare professionals. They're in place to protect you. Okay. So if you need, if you're not being heard, if you're not being listened to, if you're, being provided with a psychologist referral over a pain specialist or a surgeon, that's why it's there. But that would be my advice. And then it's diagnosed. The gold standard for diagnosis has up until, well, still is excision surgery. So it is a surgery. On the scale of how invasive surgeries can be, it's definitely a lesser invasive surgery. And then there are specialists like Dr. Matthew Leonardi, who you absolutely should follow on Instagram, who is a specialist in sonography. So he's actually very capable of diagnosing endo through advanced ultrasound. So I'm hopeful that this technology will become more and more available to other specialists. But anyway, I hope that answered that question.
Definitely. Thanks for your bit about patient advocacy. I think it's very important.
Yeah, but also if someone have the symptom, making sure that you're also managing your symptom, see Cindy, for additional information and to help manage these symptoms, because before you get diagnosed, it's also important to manage the symptoms.
Yes.
Right. No, you're absolutely right.
Yeah. And before we go, I have one last question. It's a little bit more specific, but how much do you think drinking alcohol, specifically wine, can increase estrogen impacts on your pain?
Hmm. So yeah, this is going to be individualized. Like some people can tolerate wine really well. I actually did a poll in my on my page
Oh, cool.
recently around alcohol because they did a post on this, and most people actually tolerate wine quite well, red wine. And if you had to pick, like if you asked me for a recommendation for what alcohol is best, definitely it would be wine or some kind of like straight good quality liquor. Because red wine actually contains resveratrol, which is an anti-inflammatory, and resveratrol actually also blocks this is a little bit more sciencey, but resveratrol specifically actually blocks the 4-hydroxy pathway of estrogen clearance. So it's the more inflammatory pathway. So if you have a lot of your estrogen going down there, that's the one that's associated with more like inflammation and DNA damage and that sort of thing. So resveratrol is really great for that as well. But then again, there's a lot of people have like histamine concerns with endo. And so if you have histamine concerns, red wine isn't gonna be the best option, but that's a little bit more rare. And I mean, I would keep it to the national guidelines for alcohol. So it's 1 a day for women, and that's equivalent to about, I think, a 5-ounce glass of wine or 1.5 ounces of hard liquor or a 12-ounce beer. So I wouldn't do more than that a day. Try to avoid binge drinking if you can. And again, I want to encourage people not to think of like foods and drinks singularly, but think of it as a whole. So if your diet is beautiful and colorful and amazing and full of, plant-based foods, and you're not consuming out a lot, and you're, cooking with avocado or olive oil, then that's going to be more impactful, right? And the diet as a whole is quite strong and healthy diets. Yeah.
That's a great note to end with. Thank you very much. Jenna, is
And
there anything else you want to add?
Yeah, and then like everyone be sure to follow Cindy at endo.fertility.dietitian. And I guess if you have additional questions, since we don't have enough time today, you can, pin Cindy or join her program so you get your questions answered. And then remember, this needs to be, personalized. And then obviously Cindy is the expert on this, so be sure to follow that. And I think one person also asked about the doctor's name that you mentioned. Maybe we can repeat that doctor's name.
Yeah, Dr. Matthew Leonardi. I believe his name is spelled with one T, Nathewlenardi.
Okay, great. Thank you. I have typed it in.
Yeah, and I guess we don't have much time today, but I would love to also get to know a little bit more about your products and services. So maybe we can chat in the DMs. But yeah, thanks for having me, and I hope I would be able to share some information with your following.
All right,
Absolutely.
thank you.
All right, thanks very much for having me.
Thank you, Sadie.
Have a nice evening. Thank you, everyone, for sharing.
You're welcome. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.